Assalamualaikum and good evening everyone. Today our group will present about global supply chains and global operation in multinational corporation about COVID-19 issue. This is our group members. Next, I will pass to Hidayah to continue.
My name is Nur Hidayah Hasnol. My metric number is 275752. December 2019 was the month where first COVID cases was recorded in Wuhan, China. It is located in the middle of Han and Yangtze River. Wuhan consists three cities which are Hankou, Hanyang, and Wuchang. Well, what is COVID-19? COVID-19 is a virus that was newly found in 2019 and it was named by the World Health Organization's COVID-19 on February 11, 2020. The first two letters, CO, stand for corona, VI stand for virus, D for disease, and 19 was the first this virus was found in 2019. This virus is dangerously contagious and has been spreading around all the world. The people who are caught with this virus sometimes show symptoms which is flu or cold or some discomfort around the respiratory system. People nowadays need to distance themselves with other human beings as it is easily spreadable just by a touch, or we can call it as by contact. This is the new normal which people limit the contact with other people and not seeing much of community. There's no social contact and people are living in their own area, in their own each houses. Next, the global supply chain has also been affected by this pandemic. Well, what is supply chain? Supply chain is where a product started, which is from raw material to the end consumer, and there's linkage in between. Global supply chain, on the other hand, is a global structure that was implemented by MNC company in the global level or international level. Pandemic also has directly give bad impact on the business industry, and things are changing very quickly. For example, people are not allowed to have any vacation or visit other state or place or even country as the border has been closed down, and these small shops that in tourist sector have been affected also because they are living day by day by depending on the tourism spot. The tourist people buy their product and survive daily. Our research is touching on the topic of disruption in the global supply chain. Things work differently because of this COVID-19 pandemic. Many restrictions need to be followed by producers and even customers in order for the virus not spreading around and limit the movement of people. There are a lot of industries that have been affected by this horrible virus. The three main industries that we're going to talk about are manufacturers, logistics, and healthcare industry. In order for us to identify all the problems and issues that arise during this pandemic or this COVID-19 pandemic, we have conducted a research and we use qualitative method. We have been received 100 respondents with different background industry, and from there we made our analysis. Next, we will be moving on to the background of the topic. Supply chain is very important in commerce world. It is a system of a whole process of making and selling commercial goods. It all starts with raw material and then go to manufacturer, then move to distributor, and they will distribute the product to retailers, and that is where consumer or end consumer will get the products. Well, global supply chain is not that different from supply chain. In simple words, a global supply chain is a global structure that a company applies to produce product and services. During this pandemic era, there are a lot of issues and disruption happen in the global supply chain link. For example, customer may receive their goods late. This is because, for example, in Malaysia, there are movement restriction, which in order for you to cross a state, there need to be paperwork and you need to get approval from the officers to go to another state. So in the first few weeks, there some disruption and the goods will arrive late. Next is panic buying happen. Well, because of this COVID-19 is a scary thing and people are afraid of the virus, people tend to be panic buying. They are afraid that there are not enough supply. Because of this, producers they produce more, and slowly as time change, people are more relaxed and adapt to the current situation and buy normally, and producer get affected because they have been producing lots of things, and people are not buying it as much as the first few months of the pandemic. Moving on, supply from abroad cannot be accessed. For example, Malaysian company get their supply from China, which is from abroad, and currently the pandemic has closed down all the borders and they cannot access their stocks or their raw material or their supplies. So because of this, they need to find alternative and find any local sources and get from there. This has disrupted all the plans that has been made throughout all these years. From the supplier's perspective, some customer or client, their client cancelled their order because of the same situation which they cannot send the product or they cannot supply it to overseas. As pandemic is a new thing and there is no guarantee for the future, for example, producers cannot predict the future and cannot give any expectation because things are changing very quickly, and even government rules are changing. Usually they can predict how much to produce in a month or so, but because of this changing of buying pattern, buying behavior, they cannot do that, and they are currently having difficulties in adapting to the new normal. Well, that's all for me. Thank you.
My name is Siti Khadijah binti Muhammad Yusof, metric number 275461. I'll present on introduction and conclusion for literature review part. Okay, for introduction, global supply chain is the global system that a company employs to create product or services, which this may appear to be straightforward. A global supply chain can be everything, but there are numerous aspects that must be in harmony. Employees' information, which is required to keep your system working efficiently, is part of globally distributed supply chain. Traditionally, supply chain has been thought of as a process in which raw materials are turned into finished goods and then delivered to the final client. This procedure entails the extraction and utilization of natural resources. Okay, next is about the process of managing the inner working of your company so that it functions as efficiently as possible is known as operation. The administration of business activities to achieve the best level of efficiency feasible inside an organization is known as operation management. It is concerned with efficiently transforming material and labor into goods and services in order to maximize an organization's profit. Every small business owner must oversee the design and management of behind-the-scenes activities, where they create items, sell product, or provide services. This precise definition of operation will vary depending on your sector and level of development. When it comes to optimizing operation, it's sometimes necessary to think strategically about your system and process. Other times, it involves helping to bring every phase of a project from the smallest to the largest to life on the ground.
My name is Aina Atira binti Kuzairi and my metric number is 275721. So today I will continue on the presentation for literature review on the issue of COVID-19 in global supply chain and operation. Every multinational corporation from various industries in the world would need to go through some major changes because of COVID-19 pandemic. So here, we're already listed 4 major issues that every multinational corporation faced during this pandemic. The first issue is MNC facing pressure to increase domestic production. So by increasing domestic production, the companies will get stable supply and the economy in the country will also be able to grow. However, it is not easy to sustain this and it might not work out in the long term because of the high potential of ingredients shortages. Iran is one of the example country that faces this issue. So what happened in Iran is that a forecast made shows 7 to 8% drop in the country's GDP from domestic production. So the income and the employment in the country depends on the momentum of domestic production. But it's not easy for Iran to keep the momentum going with the COVID-19 pandemic. Domestic goods production ability depends on the goods itself, meaning that not all country has the ability to produce the same product. For example, in the United States, there is a little amount of domestic production in latex glove and surgical masks, and this is because of the lack of raw materials in producing those goods. Meanwhile, in Malaysia, there is a lot of domestic production in latex glove, and this is because Malaysia is rich with latex. So it will be easier for Malaysia to produce latex glove domestically. The second issue is the difficulties in adjusting to new demands and needs of a lockdown world. So most businesses are affected by the national lockdowns and closed borders. Almost all companies have been through a dramatic drop in demand since the starting of COVID-19 pandemic. Changes in consumer demand depends on the type of industry. For example, the consumer demand for tourism industry is completely damaged due to the people being scared of getting the COVID-19 virus. Meanwhile, it's a different case for healthcare industry. This is because the demand for critical supplies such as sanitizer and surgical masks have been skyrocketed since the COVID-19 started. Manufacturers also struggle to adjust the production according to the new demand, and this includes manufacturers for products such as sanitizer, latex gloves, and more to increase their production because of the high consumer demand for critical supplies. As for the other manufacturers for different industry, they might need to reduce the production or even stop operates because of the low to no consumer demand. The third issue is lack of supply chain transparency and resilience. Lack of transparency could cause issues such as quality degradation, profiteering, fraud, and counterfeiting. So it is very important for critical suppliers to implement transparency in order to avoid those issues from happening during this COVID-19 pandemic. And supply chain transparency is actually a visibility and commitment to openness with other parties in supply chains. So if a company is not transparent enough, it will be difficult for the company to trace the problem because of the lack of information. And counterfeiting healthcare goods is actually very common during this COVID-19 pandemic. For example, in Africa, at least 300 pharmacies and hospitals have fake medicines. The last issue is unsustainable just-in-time manufacturing. So just-in-time manufacturing is basically used to improve the performance and competence, but it is not easy to sustain it. So it may give positive impact to both technical and non-technical industry, but it will be difficult to sustain during the COVID-19 pandemic. Photovoltaic manufacturing company in China has faced some problems during the COVID-19 pandemic. So what happened to that company is that it has been affected during lockdown and later got worse because of the logistic issues at the container ports in China. Most of the manufactured goods were piled up and not being able to export. Just-in-time inventory management also has affected healthcare industry. The just-in-time inventory is supposed to only keep inventory on hand as little as possible, and that has hugely affected the medical supply chain. This is because as the pandemic started, the demand for critical supplies and medical are far greater than the supply because of the speed of COVID-19 infection. I think that is all from me, so I will pass it to the next presenter to continue with the presentation.
My name is Nurhidayah binti Momarizal, batch number 273357. Now I'm going to present my part, which is the factors of the issues arising in global supply chain and operation. I will serve you 3 points. We will start with the first point, which is the cancellation and suspension of order. COVID-19 has caused various issues related to multiple industries such as manufacturing, health and medicine, and the logistics sector. This pandemic has cut off the supply chain of industry worldwide. If the sector usually source their supply in other countries, it will disrupt the supply chain and operation of the industry. Multinational corporation has illustrated the cancellation and suspension of contract order, which will limit the company's total capacity. According to Ting Chen and Hong Feng Wang in the article, because of the forward supply interruption, supply shortage might result from the order not being delivered on time. This has actually caused a pressure for the company to increase domestic production to fulfill the demand in the local market. Moreover, some of the suppliers are closing down because they have limited product to supply in order to continue their operations. China is a country that is very important in the global economy as they are very related to the manufacturer and the exporter. Actually, Malaysia depends mainly on China product. If the product can be outsourced from China, it has affected the Malaysian economy. Moreover, some of the e-commerce business also rely on the China for half of their merchandise as the product offer are more cheaper than the other country. However, this pandemic has caused the supply chain to be cut off to enter certain country in a certain period. This has shown that COVID-19 has impacted the Malaysian online business, especially the product from China. Now we're moving on to the second point, which is the change of customer purchasing behavior. As we know, COVID-19 has shaken up all industry on a massive scale. COVID-19 has brought an impact on the online business, not just in Malaysia, but worldwide. Each country has come up with their lockdown procedure to break the chain of COVID-19. The lockdown in certain countries has obstructed the import and export, which is related to the supply chain and operation in a particular country. The result of the research is that 52% of the consumer avoid shopping in a crowded area, and the rest of 36% decided to go shopping until they get the coronavirus vaccine. This has shown that the physical business is not really relevant due to the spread of COVID-19 and ended up changing the consumer's behavior to shop using e-commerce business. At the same time, the online seller also found it very difficult to sell their product due to the high demand from the customer. The online company faced a shortage in their product which enabled them to fulfill the customer demand because they usually will outsource the product from another country. Okay, overall, the consumer behavior has changed, which caused the growth rapidly in the e-commerce. The e-commerce business is trying their best to handle the new demand as they are not dealing only with one country but also with other countries. Okay, moving on to the last part, which is the weak policy and decision making. The pandemic has affected the supply chain globally, as some countries have declared lockdown, banning the import and export goods. The uncertainty of COVID-19 has left the company to rethink the supply chain strategy to sustain itself in the industry. The policymakers should maintain an efficient global supply chain procedure and operation during and after the COVID-19 are concerned. The pandemic has led to a significant increase in other cross-border policy to answer the COVID-19 threat. Moreover, according to the Gary Garify in his article, the global supply chain emerged as a protagonist. The driver and policy implications of supply chain disruption are often unclear during the pandemic. This is because the supply chain dynamics vary considerably involving the characteristics of the product, the company strategies, and the distribution channel. The logistics supply chain management should also play a vital role in having a strategic policy planning to ensure that the goods are exported and imported without increasing the number of the COVID-19 spread. However, until today, the supply chain is still deciding to break the chain of COVID-19 in the supply chain management, which reflects a weak policy implemented by the country. This is because some countries are still facing issues related to facilities, locations, capacity, transportation, distribution mode, and many other related to supply chain which are still didn't resolve.
My name is Qurratu Akilah Nushaira binti Nur Hasmi, matrix number 275652. The main focus of industry that have been affected by COVID-19 regarding global supply chain and operation are manufacturing industry, medical and healthcare industry, and lastly the logistic industry. In manufacturing industry, rapid influence on manufacturing process happened because of high demand on necessary items due to panic buying and manufacturing capacity constraint on raw materials. Even after after restricting the number of purchases per customer, they are still unable to deal with the panic buyer demand as they lack of raw materials. Major multinational business rely on China for raw materials and components. China industrial facilities have been closed down and will continue to be around for the next few months. It implies that there will be a surge in the temporary shutdown factories. Besides, in medical and healthcare industry, since everyone needs to wear masks and sanitizer, healthcare supply chains have been under tremendous strain. Healthcare workers are compelled to wear personal and protective equipment, but businesses are unable to fulfill ever-increasing demand. In some countries, to fulfill such massive demand, other industries such as automobile and fashion industry manufacturers are shifting their focus to medical equipment. In addition, workers' mental health are also affected. The rising number of daily reported cases, excessive workload, and shortage of specific medication equipment may all add to this healthcare professional and industrial worker emotional stress. Lastly, in logistic industry, due to the labor shortage and restricted zones, exporter and importer experience difficulties. Transporters are struggling to not only arrange trucks for loading, but also to alter their quotation for carrying product, and they also face decreased attendance, closure of office, and putting their operating risk at all-time level. In conclusion, labor shortage, temporary shutdown of factories, and restricted logistic zone has affected the global supply chain and operation. That's all from me. I pass the slide to the next presenter.
Conclusion, nowadays with globalization, global supply chain and operation is becoming a very important issue for most businesses. The main reason of this trend are procurement cost reduction, purchasing risk control, and revenue increasing. For instance, company may set up overseas factories to benefit from tariff and trade concession, lower labor costs, capital subsidies, and reduce logistic costs in foreign markets. Moreover, easy access to abroad markets and close proximity to customer result better organizational learning. On the other hand, improved reliability can be obtained as a consequence of closer relationship with suppliers. But due to COVID-19 pandemic, everything has changed to worse as every business activity is blocked and controlled. That's all from me.
My name is Nur Anissa binti Rahim, metric number 275640, and I will touch on methods and methodology. Commonly, on doing research methods, there are 4 steps that researchers will follow as a guideline in order to collect data based on their study. I will cover step 1 and step 2, which are explaining methodological approach and describing methods of data collection. In order to meet the objective of finding out the COVID-19 issues on global supply chain and operations in multinational corporation, our group used qualitative methods in our study. According to Creswell 2013, qualitative method is a method used to narrow down a vast field of research into one easily researchable topic, which collects and works with non-numerical data. Although the approach of qualitative and quantitative method are similar, qualitative techniques, on the other hand, use text and picture data, have distinct data processing procedure, and use a variety of designs. It is also includes discussing the study sample and general data collecting and recording technique. Qualitative data also provide understanding through data analysis procedure, techniques of presenting data, and identifying the final outcome. Next, for the step 2, we use primary data which were collected by conducting an online survey. The main goal of conducting online survey is to collect information from a group of people consists of experienced employees from 3 main industries, which are manufacturing industry, medical and health industry, and logistic industry, and also from the end user of global supply chain. The reason why we use online surveys in our study is because the online surveys are the most cost effective and can reach the highest number of individuals in answering the questionnaire provided. These online surveys also particularly effective in times of global crisis such as COVID-19 pandemic, as it reduces physical contact and form of communication of other people. The data collected are much more accurate than using any other traditional method of collecting data. Next, I will pass to my partner to present his part.
My name is Agilan Selva Kumaran and my metric number is 271452. Today I will be presenting the third and the fourth step of methodology. The next step is method of analysis. The evaluation of how a task is complete is known as method of analysis. There are two major types of analysis, which are quantitative and qualitative method. Quantitative data is a collection of information about amounts and thus figures, whereas the qualitative data is descriptive and refers to phenomena that can be observed but cannot be evaluated, such as language. First of all, for this research, as we are using qualitative method, we have prepared a Google form and gathered the results from the respondents. To analyze the data that we gained from the Google form, we used narrative analysis. It is focuses on using people's personal perspective and insights to solve the research issues. There are few steps we followed before starting to analyze the data in qualitative method, which is narrative analysis. First is getting used to the data. Then we looked into the goal of this research. After that, we created a structure. Lastly, we recognized the trend. Now we will look into the step 4, which is there are few reasons to justify why we chose qualitative method as the choice to analyze the data we gathered from the Google form. At first, qualitative research generates a comprehensive portrayal of respondents' thought, views and perceptions, as well as analyze the significance of their behaviors. Secondly, qualitative research methodology also allows us to learn about the respondents' inner experience and how ideas are shaped by and within the culture. Lastly, qualitative research method also helped us to produce a very interactive approach, which is also as a more flexible structure to collect the data, since it can be built and reconstructed to a higher extent. In conclusion, qualitative research method is also most suitable method as this issue mostly related to the written facts. That's all from me. I'll pass it to my teammate.
My name is Nura Anshwada binti Zamri with metric number 264209. I will continue presenting about analysis. Based on figure above, it explained that multinational corporations having difficulties in adjusting to a new demands and needs during lockdown. It was extremely agreed by 37 respondents out of 100. The most needed products during lockdown are surgical face masks, hand sanitizer and PPE suits. It is because face mask and hand sanitizer is compulsory to everyone, while PPE suit is compulsory for medical staff. It is applied as a precaution action in order to adapt a new norm. Because of the shocking lockdown, it led to a shocking demands and needs that will cause to a shortage products. Based on figure 2, it shows that 81 respondents agree that lack of supply chain transparency and resilience being one of the issues in global supply chain and operation. Transparency is implying the corporation to realize what has been occurred and signify this knowledge both internally and externally. Resilience is ability of the company regarding the actions toward the issue and recovering them without affecting the operation and consumer as well. Then able to detect the early warning signs of interruptions and respond to it by switching to the production into more alternative way. Next is the changes in customer behavior will affect the industry to fulfill the demand is approved by the 91 respondents according to the figure 3. The changes has been made is panic buying. These changes will lead to a higher demand of goods and shortage the products in market because it will affect the supply chain of the product around the world. This behavior will cause to the increasing of good prices drastically. Lastly is the restriction on cross-border is the major factor in disruption of global supply chain and operation is approved by the 80 respondents through the survey. It become a barrier towards some of the enterprises in order to run the progress of the product. It is because most of the cargo was backlogged at the major port, which led to travel restriction to have a shortage of their truck drivers and ocean carriers are cancelled all the sailing. Since that, the progress is running slowly and might be delayed.
My name is Izafarha binti Salihuddin and my metric number is 265133. So today I will present for the discussion part where the results and relations from the literature review are discussed in this section. The first issue of COVID-19 in global supply chain and operation is MNC facing pressure to increase their domestic production. From the results, 49 respondents agreed that MNCs are facing pressure to increase their domestic production. For example, in 2020, foreign agencies predicted a 7 to 8% decrease in GDP for Iran due to a pandemic brought on by domestic non-oil production. With regard to that, we can state that the push to boost domestic production is one of the issues of COVID-19 in the global supply chain and operations. The following issues is that MNCs are having difficulty to adapting to new demands and needs. According to the findings, 46 respondents agreed that MNCs are having difficulty adapting to it. This is because the short shutdown has left most companies with high and low demand for their production. Some suppliers, such as sanitizer manufacturers, struggle to adjust their production to high demand. Meanwhile, some businesses had to stop operating due to having extremely low to no demand at all. For example, tourism business demand is clearly low because consumers fear the capture of the COVID-19 virus. After that, 52 respondents agreed that unilateral cancellation and suspensions of orders from overseas suppliers are one of the factors in this issue. As supply interruptions created in the future, supply scarcity could result from orders not shipped on the schedule. For example, due to the strict standard operating procedure that the country applies itself, the manufacture of the finished products may be slower. The factor is the change in customer purchasing behavior, where people worldwide are terrified of adapting to the new standards, and 91 respondents agreed to this factor. The overall sales of e-commerce have increased in response to consumers who avoid going out by shopping from home. Furthermore, e-commerce businesses have encountered various issues, particularly with regard to supply chain management, as shipping and delivery processes are moving somewhat slowly. Then it affects the demands for e-commerce operations on a broad scale because the company has a deficit in its production. In this respect, we are able to see that changing the buying behavior of customers is also one of the elements which affects the global supply chain and operation. Next is effects of COVID-19 on global supply chain and operation. The labor shortage also contributes to the global supply chain and operation disruption. As a result, 47 respondents agreed that one of the reasons for the disruption was a labor shortage. Due to this pandemic, most companies had to cut their workforce due to many loss, and they were faced with a worker shortage. Operational and logistical issues arise because of labor scarcity and restricted areas for exporters and also importers. Moreover, SUP 2020 also states that the public distribution system network faced several kinds of transport challenges, including the transit of lorries and local mobility during lockout process. The absence of work then means that businesses where the project is to be completed with a reasonable compromise is lack of sufficient. In this regard, we can say that labor shortage is one of the problems that companies have to confront in the logistic industry during this pandemic.
I will continue my part, which is conclusion and recommendation. My name is Nur Farhana binti Matyal and my metric number 275807. COVID-19 is an exceptional and extraordinary event that impacts the supply chains globally. Global supply chains and operation in multinational companies got a high impact from this event. Multinational companies face a number of issues during this pandemic. One of the difficult issues to get through is facing pressure to produce stock in large quantity and meet customer demand. This research was conducted to comment on the issue that have been faced by multinational companies and the impact of this pandemic. In this research, we also received feedback from respondents through a Google form on the supply chains of healthcare, manufacturing, and logistics. Based on these conclusions, future study could consider collaboration with local companies, increasing domestic production. In turn, can help the country's economy to grow. The issue of MNC facing pressure for domestic production can be overcome in this way. The ability to produce this production depends on goods or product themselves. The next issue is due to the pandemic COVID-19, many people are afraid to go to the store to buy necessities and so on. So, this makes it difficult for some multinational companies to adapt to the demands and needs of consumers. Learn about the digital market because it will help company do business even during this pandemic. This digital market make it easy for people to find necessities on the website or buy online without having to go to a physical store. Moreover, when planning, sourcing, design, production, and logistics are part of one connected enterprise system, retailers can truly assess problems to mitigate damage if improve transparency and resilience. It is therefore necessary to use a logistic partner as it will help further streamline the supply chains and reduce risks. Logistic partner will provide the best solution involving transportation, warehousing, distribution, shipping, and also receipt. Last but not least, analyze the market demand and create a new inventory management system to sustain just-in-time systems. For example, focus on the country that has higher demand to export and shut down temporarily for the lower demand countries. This can prevent shortage of stock and inventory for markets that have high demand. That's all from our group. Thank you.